Thank you so much for joining us for another edition of All Angles. I'm Dion Jackson-Miller, and welcome as always to our viewers on onespotmedia.com. Today, a special edition of the program. I recently sat down with former Prime Minister P.J. Patterson to talk about his autobiography, My Political Journey. Now, he spoke about CARICOM and Jamaica's recent vote in the OAS to not recognize the current Maduro administration. Just today, the U.S. President Donald Trump announced that his administration is recognizing the head of the opposition in Venezuela as the country's interim leader and is urging other countries to do the same. But let's go now to my interview with Mr. Patterson. One of the threads running all through your autobiography is that of regional integration. You call yourself an unrepentant regionalist from your days as a university student with a political club, crafting a draft resolution for West Indies Federation through your years as Prime Minister to receiving the Chancellor's Medal in 2006 when you said we have a responsibility to nurture the spirit of Caribbean regionalism. Are you disappointed in CARICOM today?
I would say we have not quite achieved the goals which one would have anticipated and hoped for. But recently there are signs that the heads are about to resume the agenda which will advance the course of making integration effective. And I say that after the Golding report, which was discussed at the last meeting of CARICOM heads in Jamaica, and which has been followed since by a meeting of the members of the CARICOM integration movement and a summit which was held in Trinidad and Tobago at the end of last year. I would want to wait to see whether that is going to produce an outcome that resumes the momentum. What has happened, of course, is that the world keeps changing, and we have to change with it. And we encounter new difficulties and new challenges which we have to find a way of addressing. In the past few years, there has been a tendency for each government to concentrate almost exclusively on dealing with its own internal affairs without a recognition that there are some areas where we need to find common solutions, establish dynamic links, which will also be of immense assistance in the course of developing the economies of the member states.
You mentioned the Golding report. The Golding report had gone further. It had suggested that if CARICOM could not within 5 years indicate that it was taking serious steps to implement the CSME, the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, that Jamaica should withdraw from the CSME at that point. Would you have supported us going that far?
I think the Prime Minister has made it clear that Jamaica does not adopt that recommendation, and therefore it is unnecessary at this time to pronounce on what Jamaica should do in 5 years if the level of integration is impeded. I think what I read from that is the preparedness of Jamaica to put into place all the energies which are required to make sure that CARICOM achieves its objectives. And we have identified from the very start what the main problem is: the implementation deficit. I certainly have spent a great deal of my time, particularly in my closing years as Prime Minister of Jamaica and at one time Chairman of CARICOM, seeing how we could devise machinery that would make implementation more effective. We were not able to do so, I think, unless the heads agree that there must be in place something which ensures that decisions once taken are acted upon meaningfully, we will continue to drag.
In fact, it's been some 25 years since Time for Action, Sir Shudath Ramphal and the West Indies Commission, and we're still here debating CARICOM and its lack of action and implementation deficit. If you ever lose hope?
No, I have not lost hope. But central to the recommendation of the Ramphal Commission was the idea of establishing a small body which would have an executive capacity to ensure the implementation of decisions. There were only a few heads, including Jamaica, that would be prepared to support the recommendation. Most of the heads were against it and felt that one, it would be too costly, and secondly, perhaps more importantly in their view, it was going to impinge on their sovereignty. I didn't take that view, nor did the then Prime Minister of Antigua and Trinidad and Tobago, but we were virtually alone. As a result of that, we suggested the establishment of a troika, which is something that has obtained in a number of other integration movements. The fact is, it has not produced the results that were desired. And many years after, in fact, at our meeting in Jamaica, when I presided and came up with a Rose Hall Declaration, we identified certain steps that were to be taken. A group was established, chaired by Prime Minister Gonzalez. The report was presented at the very last meeting at which I attended as Prime Minister, and it certainly seems to have been abandoned since. You can't have an integration movement that suffers from the lack of enforcement capacity, and that is a must which the leaders have to accept, or the consequences will continue to be as they are.
4th of July 1973, you were actually a ministerial witness to the signing of the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which established CARICOM. Article 17 of that treaty speaks of member states, or spoke to member states aiming at the fullest possible coordination of foreign policy and seeking to adopt as far as possible common positions on major international affairs. Are you then disappointed to see how CARICOM has fractured on the issue of Venezuela?
I think every effort has to be made in reaching a common position in terms of foreign policy. But there have always been and always are likely to be situations in which it is impossible to gain a unanimous decision.
Is this one?
I am disappointed that CARICOM has been unable to come to an agreement on this one. I think we have too much at stake as a region to be divided about it, and particularly in the Organization of American States, where the Caribbean has clout because of the size of its membership and therefore its voting capacity. It becomes the more important when an issue as close and as important to us as Venezuela is, that we find some way of arriving at a united position. It's difficult, but certainly no effort should be spared on reaching that.
29th of June 2005, Venezuela and 14 Caribbean states signed the Petro-Caribe Agreement. August 24, Jamaica and Venezuela signed a bilateral agreement, and you said in your book, a more generous agreement could not be made. Given that kind of history then, was Jamaica's vote at the OAS to not recognize the Maduro government's current term a slap in the face
Jamaica?
of a friend?
Jamaica supports the resolution.
Undoubtedly. We understand that there have been concerns about the situation in Venezuela, the economic situation and the legislative one. It should be remembered that the courts of Venezuela have indicated by their rulings that the process being pursued is a legitimate one. We can't ignore that totally. The main thing has been whether we exert our maximum influence as friends, as brothers and sisters, to help Venezuela overcome the obstacles which it presently confronts, or whether we distance ourselves. I think the story of the Good Samaritan, which the gospel tells us about, is one which we ought not to forget, even in our diplomatic considerations. I think on the question of Venezuela, it is in CARICOM's interest that we should find a common position and use our influence, which I think is not inconsiderable, in helping to persuade the government of Venezuela to do those things which are of concern to the international community.
We'll be back with my interview with Mr. Patterson after the break.